Hello Internet, I'm Josh from Lustria Lives and welcome to a Seraphon In-Depth. Today we will be discussing the current ally situation, basically what units to take and why to take them. Keep in mind this discussion is based around the current season of Galatian Champions and options may be better or worse in later seasons. Now let's get into the video. So first off, why would you take allies in an army? Why not just take everything from the same faction? Well, there's a few different reasons. Most common one is filling a role that your army lacks, whether you're lacking mobility or good wizards or some cheap chaff. A lot of allies for most armies fall into this category. You can see pictured tree revenants. That's kind of the quintessential unit for this, is armies like Lumineth taking one unit of 5 of these to teleport around and grab objectives for just over 100 points. The next main reason would be a specific synergy in their war scroll, something that affects the units in your army in some beneficial way. This would be like battle mages in Sylvaneth, giving them a bonus to charge after they teleport, or as pictured, the Marsh Crawla Sloggoth, having an aura that affects all destruction units and being often allied into other combat-focused destruction armies that can benefit from it. The third reason isn't really that relevant to Seraphon, and it's having units be brought in that are more efficient or better costed than units in your main army. Currently, the quintessential example of this is squig herds, which are finding their way into most other destruction armies due to the current power of that war scroll. But in Seraphon, we're so synergy dependent and we have pretty good units overall anyway, that this reason doesn't happen very often for us. So the two factions that we have allies available from are Cities of Sigmar and Stormcast Eternals. They have very different reasons to take allies from them, so we'll break those down really quick before we get into specific units. Cities in general has cheap bodies, cheap heroes, and some utility pieces throughout its many different war scrolls. There's a wide variety of units because of the 3 different races that were basically put together to make cities, and we can get a few utility pieces or screens from this army. Stormcast has a massive selection, the largest army book currently in print, that is filled with great utility heroes with varied effects, but the units themselves can be pretty similar and don't do enough without their support pieces for us to consider taking them. So first up are the Cities of Sigmar units, and we have the Battle Mage of Gur specifically. This character has a War Scroll spell that is +2 to run and charge, which can be really useful on some of our slower combat units like Saurus Knights and Carnosaurs. He also natively has a +1 to cast because all missions in this current season are set in Gur. He combos really well with any of our abilities that grant run and charge, like Starstone Staff or the Beastmaster Mount trait, as well as our own +1 run and charge from the Hunter's Steed constellation. You can combine all of these to get a 36-inch threat range on a Stegodon Chief with the Cloak of Feathers, which basically allows you to put that character anywhere on the table. The only downside to him, and why he's not seen very often in our armies at least, is that whatever he does decide to buff is usually going to be fast enough to outpace the rest of our army. And since we don't have a really strong melee alpha punch, whatever we send out usually ends up kind of a suicide missile. But if that's what you need in your list to get rid of a big threat, he can be a great inclusion to turn that Stegodon Chief into a heat-seeking missile of dinosaur armor. And he gets the Bronze Croak Death Mask. Alright, next up, this is a favorite of mine, is Doralia Van Denst. She can hide in the temple, really increases or adds to our anti-magic potential. And we do kind of struggle with bigger monster wizards that we can't chip down with spells. And mortals, things like Manfred, any of the combat characters that get given an arcane tome, like Mangler Squigs or Maw Crushes. She can do an average of 4 damage to those every turn from a good 24 inches away, which definitely isn't bad considering how cheap she is. Basically, you deploy her in the temple, the -1 to hit from the garrison, and her native 5-up ward, giving her a lot of survivability, as well as the large footprint of the temple, increasing the area she can shoot without having to move to get her second shot. She isn't that great in the current season because as a named character she is not a Galatian champion, and she can't target Galatian champions since she can't join the sharpshooters battalion. But in past seasons, when those monster wizard characters were more prevalent, she was a great inclusion, and she is something to keep in mind for the future. Now getting into the Stormcast options, we have the ubiquitous ally of the Knight Incanter. Effectively, this is a 120 point caster with a once per game auto unbind and a decent War Scroll spell. The War Scroll spell is interesting for us as we're not the fastest army, so slowing down our opponents can help us a great deal. However, it's been power crept a little bit, and one introduction on charge ranges isn't going to make or break most armies. But if you need a cheap caster, he is cheaper than our current cheapest option in the Star Priest, and the auto unbind is definitely useful in the current meta with Techless kind of running rampant, so he's definitely something to keep in mind. Next we have the Knight Zephyrus. This is included for one reason and one reason only, that is the Cunning Maneuver battle tactic. This is a 100-point Galatian champion with a native teleport. It just gives you that battle tactic for free. It can fill out a warlord battalion to give you a extra artifact, but that's really about it. They do have a shooting attack that could do an occasional wound here or there, but since you're taking this for the teleport, the melee profile isn't really anything to consider, since it usually will just be teleporting from objective to objective anyway. But it's only 100 points. It's a Galatian champion. It can enable you to have that Cunning Maneuver battle tactic and the day is ours grand strategy. So if that's what you're looking for, it's a solid last inclusion in a list to fill out those remaining points. Next up, we have the Celestine Prime and the winner of this video's Golden Death Mask. This is my pick for our best ally, even after all the point increases that both us and him have received. His shooting combos really well with our Comet's Call spell and the Realm Shaper engine to splash mortals out and really threaten to instantly kill in one turn all the 5 wound characters that are running around. He has Rend 3 on his melee profile, which we do not have in our army, and he can flex between the artillery shooting profile and an assassin depending on the matchup. What I mean by that is that he effectively fills one of 2 roles in our army, and because of the way his staying up in the heavens rule works, he can flex between those 2 roles depending on what army we're facing, and you never have to pick in advance. Basically, if you're up against an army with a lot of support heroes, and your first turn you Comet's Call and you Realm Shaper and you get a couple of them down to 1 or 2 wounds, he can come down out of the sky immediately, fire his shot, kill that Cathaller, kill that Squig boss, whatever else they have left, and cripple their combo or support hero build right off the bat. This is definitely the thing to do against armies like Lumineth, Nighthaunt, Gitz, or other Seraphon to kill their priests and star priests. Or if you're fighting a more elite army like Nurgle, Stormcast, or a Varangard heavy Slaves of Darkness, he can just stay up in the sky building up his number of attacks until turn 2 or even 3, come down with 7 Rend 3 damage 3 attacks, and charge in to say a 3-pack of Varangard or a unit of Blight Kings and just crush them all by himself with an automatic 12-inch charge. He's really reliable, he's decently tanky, he allows us to fill 2 roles that we're missing and can pick between them as we need them. I really like this guy. I've converted one up to match my army's scheme. I've taken him to several tournaments, and outside of my dice horribly betraying me, most times I put him on the table. He always does really well for me. Next up, we have a new addition to the list that I've only recently begun to consider. We have the Knight Vexilar, the winner of the Silver Death Mask. He is only 120 points. He's a Galatian champion in the current season with 6 wounds and a 3-up armor. He has a similar shooting profile to the Celestine Prime. It's only once per game, but it is 6 inches from a point instead of 3 inches from a point, which gives you 4 times the surface area on the table. And my current list has been taking 2 of these, which both brings me to 6 heroes, allowing me to take 3 artifacts, but also allows me to combo both meteor standards in the same turn, along with Comet's Call, the Realm Shaper Engine, and 2 units of Chameleon Skinks to wipe out 2 or 3 foot characters from my opponent's army, oftentimes removing all of their Galatian champions right off the beginning of the game, usually putting dents in several of their units while I do so. It's a really great alpha strike that only uses units you were already taking plus 240 points of Galatian champions that come with an extra artifact. I really like him at the moment, and he's been doing a lot of work for me. I do think you kind of need to bring 2, as the one shot sometimes doesn't do enough to finish off those characters, but 2 are still 12 wounds on a 3-up save that can support other units in combat, can help defend your Realm Shaper. I really like them a lot. Next up we have the Knight Venator. For 140 points, he's a fast Galatian champion. He kind of has a similar role to the Knight Vexilar in that he's an anti-Galatian champion piece. However, instead of hitting multiple units in an area, he hits 1 for d6, which is on the surface more, but I find it to be too swingy to actually rely on. He's not really worth taking 2 because you oftentimes will just have to dump both into the same character anyway. The extra splash damage on units surrounding those support characters from the Vexilar is honestly really appreciated in our army. So in my opinion, this guy is an amazing model, hopefully worth it in the future, but at the moment just currently outclassed by the Vexilar, who synergizes better with our existing rules. Alright, so now we have some honorable mentions, things that aren't really worth it in a competitive setting, but can definitely be fun things to include in your game to mix things up. The Celestine Ballista adds some ranged threat to us. I've actually converted one out of a Stegodon bow. You can stick it in the Realm Shaper or just stick it off on a side objective. It combines pretty well with all of the ranged threat that, for example, Thunder Lizard lists can put out, and it thematically can work really well since we already have big ballista bows in our army. Shadow Warriors are something I've considered in the past as an alternative to Chameleon Skinks, since they don't do quite as much damage as 5 Chameleon Skinks, but have 5 extra bodies to take objectives with, and can actually do something in combat. However, since the Hunters of Huanchi War Scroll came out, these are just outclassed by that, and I would never take them over that unit. The Rune Lord is a priest which can take advantage of our mystical terrain. He has 2 dispels, which can really help our anti-magic. However, we do already have really good anti-magic, so unless you're not taking a Slann, he's not really doing as much as he is in most other armies that can ally in Cities of Sigmar. So for that reason, I tend to leave him at home. And then finally, a cheap, powerful caster is a sorceress with a unit of 10 Darkling Coven. I personally prefer Dark Shards, however the 2 melee options are cheaper. They're just there to stand with her on an objective, get stabbed every turn, make her a +2 caster, and fire off Mortal Wound spell from her War Scroll. Personally, I'm not a huge fan of this combo in our army. I feel that the point spent on this is better spent on skink casters that include additional abilities that synergize with our army better, but it's definitely an option to keep in mind, especially going into the Dawnbringer Crusade book. Alright. Alright, now that's everything. If you think I missed any units that have been doing well in your games, drop a comment below, make your case, maybe they'll get an inclusion in a future video. And until then, thanks for watching.